3 months. Just 3 months pretending to be my wife. Serafina nearly dropped the coffee she was holding with both hands, her fingers trembling not from the cold London morning, but from the absurd proposal she had just heard. Through the fogged window of the small cafe where she had worked for 2 years, she watched the man in the impeccable suit who had just turned her life upside down. "Sorry, sir. What did you say your name was again?" She blinked several times as if that could make reality make more sense. "Maximilian Ashworth." He pronounced each syllable with the arrogance of someone accustomed to being recognized. "And you are Serafina Hayes, 24 years old, orphaned since 16, living in apartment 4B on Baker Street, working here from 6 in the morning to 6 in the evening, and 3 months behind on rent." Serafina's blood ran cold. How did he know all this? She swallowed hard and placed the cup on the counter with more force than intended. "How do you—" "I have my resources." Maximilian adjusted his Italian shirt cuffs with precise movements. "And I have a proposal that can solve all your financial problems." Serafina studied him carefully. Tall, perfectly styled black hair, blue eyes as cold as the English winter, and a posture that screamed money and power. She had seen his photo in the newspapers, the young billionaire who had inherited the family hotel empire at 28. But why the hell was he here, in her humble cafe, offering her money? "I don't understand why you would need me to—" "My grandmother is dying." The words came out dry without apparent emotion, but Serafina caught something deeper in his eyes. "She has one condition for leaving me the complete family inheritance: that I be married. Not just engaged, not just dating. Married." "And why don't you marry someone from your social level?" Serafina gestured vaguely, indicating her simple clothes in contrast to the suit that probably cost more than her annual salary. An ironic smile curved Maximilian's lips. "Because every woman I know wants exactly that, to marry me for the money. I need someone who can be convincing as a loving wife, but who has no illusions about our arrangement. So you want me to lie to your dying grandmother? I want you to save my family's legacy." He leaned over the counter, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone. "And I want to save you too. £50,000 for 3 months of acting. More than enough to pay off your debts and start a new life." Serafina felt the world spin. £50,000. It was more money than she could earn in 5 years working there. But there was something in the way he spoke, as if she were just another problem to be solved with money, that irritated her deeply. "And if I say no? You won't say no?" The arrogance was back in his voice. "People like you always say yes to people like me." Anger boiled in Serafina's chest. "People like me? You mean poor people? Desperate people? Practical people?" Maximilian didn't seem fazed by her irritation. "I'm sure you're an intelligent woman, Serafina. You wouldn't let pride speak louder than necessity." She wanted to throw him out of the cafe, wanted to say she'd rather starve than accept his arrogant charity. But then she remembered the eviction notice on her bedside table, the unpaid medical bills from her adoptive father's last year of life, the nearly empty refrigerator. How would it work? The question came out as a whisper. "Civil marriage tomorrow. You'll move into my house, attend social events as my wife, meet my family." He paused, his gaze softening imperceptibly. "Separate bedrooms, of course, after 3 months an amicable divorce, and you'll go on with your life with enough money to never worry again. And your grandmother? Won't she suspect it's fake? Leave Lady Margaret Ashworth to me." Something dark crossed his face. "She has her own secrets." Serafina closed her eyes, trying to process everything. When she opened them again, Maximilian was watching her with an intensity that made her blush. "I need to think." "You don't have time." He placed a card on the counter. "My grandmother wants to meet my wife at Sunday dinner. That gives us exactly 5 days to get married and for you to learn how to act like an Ashworth." "An Ashworth?" Serafina picked up the card, noting the expensive paper and the gold-embossed coat of arms. "My family is particular about certain things. Protocol, etiquette, Appearances. He hesitated. It won't be easy. Are you telling me I'm not good enough for your family? Irritation returned to her voice. I'm telling you they're complicated people. For the first time, his mask of indifference wavered. And that you are different. Different how? Maximilian studied her for a long moment as if trying to solve a puzzle. Genuine. It's refreshing in a way. The compliment caught her off guard, making her heart race in a way she didn't like at all. This was business, she reminded herself. Just business. What happens if your family discovers it's a lie? They won't discover it. Confidence returned to his voice. As long as you play your part. Serafina looked around the small cafe, the worn tables, the coffee machine that had needed repair for months, the bills piled up in the back office. Then she looked at the man in front of her, who represented a completely different world. If I accept, she said slowly, I want one thing to be clear. You may have all the money in the world, but that doesn't give you the right to treat me as inferior. I may be poor, but I have dignity. Something flashed in Maximilian's blue eyes. Surprise? Admiration? Duly noted, Mrs. Hayes. I'm not your wife yet. But you will be. He stood up, adjusting his jacket. My lawyer will contact you this afternoon with the contracts. Read everything carefully. And if I change my mind? Maximilian stopped at the door and turned to her, a half-smile playing on his lips. You won't change your mind. After he left, Serafina stood behind the counter for long minutes, the cards still in her hand. Serafina Hayes would become Serafina Ashworth for 3 months. The idea was both terrifying and exciting. She had no idea that in less than 24 hours she would be wearing a simple but elegant wedding dress, pronouncing vows that sounded too true for her own comfort, and discovering that pretending to be in love with Maximilian Ashworth would be much easier than she had ever imagined. And she also didn't know that in less than a week she would be meeting Evangeline Price, the woman Maximilian had loved passionately years ago and who had just returned to London. The woman who would make Serafina realize that 3 months could be enough time for her heart to break into pieces. For now, all she could do was hold the card with the golden Ashworth coat of arms and wonder if she was about to commit the biggest mistake or the biggest opportunity of her life. The door chime rang as another customer entered, bringing her back to reality. Serafina tucked the card into her apron pocket and forced a smile. Good morning, how can I help you? But her mind was miles away, imagining what it would be like to wake up in the Ashworth mansion, pretend she loved a man who saw her only as a temporary employee, and try to keep her heart intact in the process. If only she knew how impossible the last part would be. 24 hours later, Serafina stood before a mirror in an exclusive boutique, staring at a stranger. The ivory silk dress hugged her curves perfectly, its simple elegance making her look like she belonged in Maximilian's world. Beautiful, murmured the seamstress, adjusting the delicate lace sleeves. Mr. Ashworth has exquisite taste. Serafina's stomach churned. He had chosen her dress without even consulting her, just like everything else about this arrangement. The contract had arrived that afternoon, 15 pages of legal jargon that essentially made her a well-paid actress for 3 months. Ready? Maximilian's voice came from behind the curtain. As ready as someone can be for a fake wedding, she muttered. When she emerged, his breath caught audibly. For a moment, his composed mask slipped, revealing something raw and unguarded in his blue eyes. You look... He cleared his throat. Appropriate. Appropriate? Serafina raised an eyebrow. Such romantic words for your bride. This isn't romance, Miss Hayes, it's business. But his voice lacked its usual coldness. The civil ceremony was held in a small private room at the registry office. Only Maximilian's lawyer witnessed as they exchanged vows that felt disturbingly real on Serafina's tongue. When Maximilian slipped the platinum ring onto her finger, his hands were surprisingly gentle. You may kiss the bride, the officiant announced. Panic flashed in Serafina's eyes, but Maximilian stepped closer, his hand cupping her cheek with unexpected tenderness. Just for show, he whispered, his breath warm against her lips. The kiss was meant to be brief, perfunctory. Instead, it sent electricity through every nerve in her body. When they broke apart, both were breathing harder than they should have been. "Well," Maximilian said, his voice slightly hoarse. That was convincing. An hour later, Serafina found herself in the passenger seat of his Aston Martin, watching London's wealthy neighborhoods blur past. The Ashworth mansion loomed before them like something from a Gothic novel, all stone facades and imposing towers. "Impressive," she breathed. "Home, sweet home." Maximilian's tone was bitter. "Try not to look too overwhelmed when you meet the family tomorrow." Inside, the house was even more intimidating. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined the walls, and every piece of furniture looked priceless. "Your room is upstairs," Maximilian said, leading her up a grand staircase. "Third door on the right. Mine is at the end of the hall." He stopped before an ornate door. "Remember, we're madly in love. Newlyweds who can't keep our hands off each other." "And how exactly do we fake that?" Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Carefully." That evening, as Serafina sat in her opulent bedroom, bigger than her entire flat, she wondered what she had gotten herself into. The wedding ring felt heavy on her finger, a constant reminder of the lie she was living. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Maximilian entered carrying 2 glasses of wine, looking oddly vulnerable without his usual armor of arrogance. "Thought you might need this," he said, offering her a glass. "Tomorrow will be challenging. Your family doesn't approve of commoners. My family doesn't approve of anyone." He sat in the chair across from her, suddenly looking exhausted. "Especially anyone who might genuinely care about me rather than my bank account. Is that why you chose me? Because I can't possibly care about you?" Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, among other reasons. "What are the other reasons?" Maximilian was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "You have kind eyes. Even when you're angry with me, which seems to be often, there's kindness there. My grandmother will see that." The unexpected compliment made her heart skip. "You think I'm kind?" "I think you're dangerous," he said softly, then seemed to catch himself. "For this arrangement, I mean. You make lies sound like truth." Before she could respond, he stood abruptly. "Get some rest, Mrs. Ashworth. Tomorrow, you meet the wolves." After he left, Serafina touched her lips, still feeling the ghost of their wedding kiss. This was supposed to be simple. 3 months of pretending, then freedom. But as she looked at her reflection in the antique mirror, wedding ring catching the light, she had a terrible feeling that the only person she'd end up lying to was herself. Outside her window, London glittered like scattered diamonds, beautiful and cold. Somewhere out there, Evangeline Price was probably planning her return to the man she'd left behind. The man who was now Serafina's husband in name only. 3 months suddenly felt both like an eternity and nowhere near enough time. "Remember, we met at a charity gala 6 months ago," Maximilian whispered as they approached the dining room doors. His hand rested possessively on Serafina's lower back, sending unwanted shivers through her spine. "Love at first sight. We've been inseparable ever since. And if they ask about my background, you're an art curator, private collector clients. It explains why you're not in the society pages." His fingers tightened slightly. "Just follow my lead." The mahogany doors opened to reveal a dining room that belonged in a palace. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over a table set for 6, and at its head sat the most formidable woman Serafina had ever seen. Lady Margaret Ashworth was 85 years old, and radiated the kind of power that came from generations of breeding and wealth. Her steel-gray hair was perfectly coiffed, her diamonds caught the light like stars, and her pale blue eyes, so much like Maximilian's, missed nothing. "Grandmother," Maximilian said, his voice warming genuine affection, "I'd like you to meet my wife, Serafina." "So," Lady Margaret's voice was crisp, cultured, "this is the mysterious woman who captured my grandson's heart." Serafina felt like a specimen under a microscope. "It's an honor to meet you, Lady Ashworth." "The honor," said a cold voice from across the room. Remains to be seen. Victoria Ashworth Sterling, Maximilian's cousin, glided forward like a predator. Everything about her screamed old money, from her perfectly highlighted blonde hair to her designer dress that probably cost more than Serafina's annual rent. Victoria, Maximilian's voice held a warning. I'm simply curious about your whirlwind romance. Victoria's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. 6 months of dating, and none of us met her. How wonderfully romantic. And secretive. We preferred privacy, Serafina said, lifting her chin. She wouldn't be intimidated by this woman. How refreshing, drawled another voice. Edmund Ashworth, Maximilian's uncle, joined them with a martini in hand. Privacy. Such a quaint concept these days. As they settled around the table, Serafina noticed the way the family watched her, like hawks circling prey. Only Lady Margaret remained neutral, observing with the patience of someone who had seen many pretenders come and go. Tell me, dear, Lady Margaret said as the first course was served. What drew you to my grandson? Serafina glanced at Maximilian, who was watching her intently. His passion, she said softly, surprising herself with the truth in her voice. When he talks about the hotels, about preserving family legacy, there's fire in his eyes. It's captivating. Something flickered across Maximilian's face. Victoria's fork paused halfway to her mouth. How poetic, Victoria recovered. And what does your family think of this union? The question hit like a physical blow. Serafina's chest tightened. I don't have family. I'm an orphan. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Lady Margaret spoke. Family is what we make of it, child, blood or otherwise. Her eyes held a warmth that surprised Serafina. You're an Ashworth now. Of course, Victoria's voice dripped false sweetness. Some of us are more concerned with bloodlines than others. Victoria, Maximilian's voice was ice. That's enough. Is it, though? Victoria's mask finally slipped. A nobody from nowhere sweeping in to claim our legacy? How convenient that grandmother's will requires marriage. The will, Lady Margaret said quietly, requires love. Real, lasting love. Something you've never understood, Victoria. The dinner continued with increasing tension. Edmund made cutting remarks about social climbers. Victoria questioned everything from Serafina's education to her sudden appearance in Maximilian's life, and through it all, Lady Margaret watched with those knowing eyes. When Victoria excused herself for a phone call, Lady Margaret leaned toward Serafina. Walk with me in the garden afterward, dear. I'd like to speak privately. Serafina's blood chilled, but she nodded. Later, as they strolled among the roses, Lady Margaret was quiet for so long, Serafina wondered if she'd forgotten her presence. He's been hurt before, you know, the old woman finally said. Evangeline Price. Beautiful girl, but selfish to her core. She left him for a title. Married some Italian count. Serafina's heart clenched at the pain in her voice. For 3 years he's been closed off, angry. But tonight, Lady Margaret stopped walking and studied Serafina. Tonight I saw glimpses of the boy who used to bring me wildflowers. The way he looks at you protects you, it's real. Lady Margaret, I'm dying, child. Cancer. I have perhaps 2 months. She said it matter-of-factly, but Serafina saw the fear beneath. I wanted to see him happy before I go. Truly happy. Not just successful or dutiful, but happy. Tears stung Serafina's eyes. Whatever brought you together, hold on to it. Lady Margaret grasped her hand. He needs someone who sees beyond the money and the name, someone who sees him. As they returned to the house, Serafina's mind reeled. How could she tell this dying woman that her grandson's happiness was built on lies? That in 3 months the love she believed in would dissolve like smoke? Maximilian was waiting in the foyer, his face tense with worry. Everything all right? Your grandmother is remarkable, Serafina said truthfully. Something in her voice made him step closer. What did she tell you? That you were hurt before. By Evangeline. Maximilian's entire body went rigid. She had no right. She cares about you. Serafina reached out, her hand covering his. She wants you to be happy. For a moment, they stood frozen, her small hand covering his larger one. The connection between them felt electric, dangerous. Serafina, he said softly. This is... I know what this is, she whispered. But she didn't pull her hand away. Neither did he. Outside, Victoria watched from her car, her phone pressed to her ear. Yes, I'm certain. Evangeline? It's time to come home. 3 days into married life, Serafina was beginning to understand the dangerous rhythm of living with Maximilian Ashworth. Morning coffee together where he actually smiled, genuinely smiled, when she made dry observations about the morning news. Evenings when he'd find excuses to linger in doorways, watching her read by the fireplace. Moments when the pretense felt less like acting and more like hope. She was cataloging his laugh, rich and unexpected when she'd mimicked Victoria's haughty accent, when the doorbell chimed through the mansion like a death knell. Expecting someone? Serafina asked, looking up from the legal documents she'd been reviewing for her art curator cover story. Maximilian frowned, checking his watch. No one who would... Max, darling? The voice that rang through the foyer was honey over steel, cultured and confident. Serafina watched the color drain from Maximilian's face as if he'd seen a ghost, because in many ways, he had. Evangeline Price glided into the sitting room like she owned it, and Serafina's heart sank to her toes. She was everything Serafina wasn't, statuesque, golden-haired, wearing a cream Chanel suit that probably cost more than a car. But it was the way Maximilian looked at her, stunned, pained, something close to devastation, that made Serafina's chest constrict with unexpected jealousy. Ava. His voice was barely a whisper. Surprise. Evangeline's laugh tinkled like wind chimes. I heard the most extraordinary rumor and simply had to come see for myself. Married? Our Max? Her green eyes finally acknowledged Serafina's presence, with the kind of dismissive glance usually reserved for furniture. And this must be the temporary arrangement. My wife, Maximilian said, his voice regaining strength. Serafina Ashworth. Something flashed across Evangeline's perfect features. Surprise that he'd corrected her. Annoyance that she wasn't being treated like the prodigal beloved returning home. How lovely, she purred, extending a manicured hand. I'm Evangeline. Max and I have history. The handshake was brief, but Serafina felt the assessment in it. She was being measured, weighed, and found wanting. All ancient history, Maximilian said quickly, but his eyes kept drifting back to Evangeline like a moth to flame. Is it, though? Evangeline settled herself gracefully on the sofa, the same sofa where Maximilian had taught Serafina to play chess just the night before. I've made such a terrible mistake, Max. Alessandro was... Well, titles aren't everything, are they? Serafina watched Maximilian's jaw clench. Alessandro, the Italian count who had stolen Evangeline away. Your marriage is over? The question came out harsher than intended. Annulled, Evangeline said lightly. Turns out he was already married. Can you imagine? All those months in Tuscany completely wasted. She turned those luminous green eyes to Maximilian. I've come home to fix things, to fix us. The silence that followed was deafening. Serafina could practically hear her heart breaking as she watched the man she was pretending to love, but maybe wasn't pretending anymore, struggle with the return of his ghost. Ava, Maximilian began, but she cut him off with a gesture. Don't say anything now, I know this is a shock. She stood, smoothing down her skirt. I'm staying at the Dorchester, room 412. When you're ready to talk, really talk, you know where to find me. She moved toward the door, then paused as if just remembering something. Oh, and Max? Grandmother looks well. I stopped by this morning. Such interesting conversations we had about family expectations. The threat was velvet-wrapped but unmistakable. After she left, the sitting room felt cold despite the crackling fire. "She went to see your grandmother?" Serafina's voice was steadier than she felt. Ava always was strategic. Maximilian slumped into his chair, suddenly looking years older. "She knows exactly how to—" He stopped, running his hands through his hair. "How to what?" "How to make me question everything." His blue eyes met hers, and she saw confusion there, pain, and something that might have been regret. "I need some air." He left her sitting there, surrounded by the remnants of their comfortable morning routine that now felt like a children's tea party, interrupted by wolves. That evening, Maximilian didn't come down for dinner. Serafina ate alone in the enormous dining room, every clink of her fork against china echoing like gunshots. When she finally went upstairs, she could hear him on the phone in his study, his voice low and intense. She pressed her ear to the door despite herself. "Can't just waltz back and expect—" 3 years, Ava. 3 years of— Complicated now. I have responsibilities." When the call ended, silence fell like a heavy blanket. Serafina crept back to her room, but sleep was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Evangeline's perfect smile and the way Maximilian had looked at her, like she was the sun after 3 years of winter. Around midnight, she heard his door open, footsteps in the hall. They paused outside her room for so long she held her breath, wondering if he would knock, what she would say if he did. But the footsteps moved on, and she was left staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was what real heartbreak felt like. Not the sharp crack she'd expected, but a slow, crushing weight that made breathing difficult. The next morning, Maximilian was gone before she woke up. Mrs. Patterson, the housekeeper, mentioned he'd left for the office early, very early, and that he'd asked not to be disturbed. Serafina spent the day in the garden, trying to read, but the words blurred together. When evening came and he still hadn't returned, she made a decision that terrified her. She was going to fight for him. Not because of the contract or the money, or even Lady Margaret's dying wish, but because somewhere between their fake wedding and stolen morning conversations, she had done the one thing she'd promised herself she wouldn't do. She had fallen in love with her temporary husband. The question now was whether she was too late. Serafina found Maximilian in his study at 3 a.m, staring at a half-empty bottle of whiskey and a photograph she couldn't quite see from the doorway. He looked up when she entered, his eyes red-rimmed and haunted. "Can't sleep either?" she asked softly, settling into the chair across from his desk. He turned the photograph face down quickly, but not before she glimpsed golden hair and a radiant smile. "You should be resting. Hard to rest when your husband is drowning in whiskey and memories." She reached across the desk, her fingers grazing his. "Talk to me, Max. Really talk to me." The use of his name, the first time she'd said it without sarcasm or formality, made him look up sharply. In the dim lamplight, he looked younger, more vulnerable. "What do you want me to say?" His voice was rough. "That seeing her again doesn't affect me. That 3 years erased what we had. I want you to tell me what you're thinking, what you're feeling." She took a breath, gathering courage. "I want you to tell me if you're going back to her." "The contract. Forget the bloody contract." The words exploded from her with a force that surprised them both. "For once, just tell me the truth. Not as your temporary wife or your business arrangement, but as someone who cares about you." Maximilian stared at her, something shifting in his expression. "You care about me?" "More than I should, more than is smart." She laughed shakily. "God help me, Max, but I'm falling in love with you. Not your money, not your name, not the security you offered me. You." The confession hung between them like a live wire. Maximilian pushed back from the desk, pacing to the window. "You can't." His voice was strained. This was supposed to be simple, clean, no complications. "Well, congratulations. It's complicated as hell now." She stood following him. "Because somewhere between our fake wedding and learning that you take your coffee black and hate your eggs runny, I forgot this was pretend." He turned to face her, and she saw the war raging in his blue eyes. Sarah, she hurt you. It wasn't a question. Evangeline. She destroyed something in you, and you've been protecting yourself ever since. She chose money over love, a title over what we had. His laugh was bitter. Ironic, isn't it? Now I've done the same thing, chosen a business arrangement over anything real. This doesn't feel like business to me. She stepped closer, close enough to touch him. Does it feel like business to you? For a moment, she thought he might reach for her. His hand lifted slightly, but then he pulled back. Ava was my first love, my only love, I thought, when she left. He shook his head. I swore I'd never let anyone have that power over me again. And now she's back expecting you to fall at her feet like nothing happened. She thinks I'll leave you for her, that this marriage is just another business deal I can break. His eyes found hers. Maybe she's right. The words hit like a physical blow, but Serafina lifted her chin defiantly. Maybe she is. But before you go running back to the woman who abandoned you for a better offer, ask yourself something. What? When you look at her, do you see the future or just the past? Before he could answer, she closed the distance between them, her hand cupping his cheek. When you look at me, what do you see? His breath caught. I see. He struggled with the words. I see someone who makes me laugh, someone who challenges me, who isn't impressed by what I own or who my family is, someone who looks at me like I matter, not my bank account. Then why are you so afraid? Because loving someone gives them the power to destroy you. His hand covered hers against his cheek. Ava proved that. I'm not Eva. Her voice was fierce, determined. I'm not going anywhere for money or titles or anything else. But I won't beg you to choose me, Max. I won't compete for scraps of affection with a ghost. She started to pull away, but his hand tightened over hers, holding her there. What if I choose wrong again? What if you don't choose at all and spend the rest of your life wondering? They were so close now she could feel his breath against her lips, could see the gold flecks in his blue eyes. Sarah, he whispered, and her name sounded like a prayer. This time when he kissed her, it wasn't for show or contracts or convincing anyone of anything. It was desperate, real, full of 3 weeks of suppressed longing and the terror of maybe losing each other. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. I need time, he said against her forehead. To think, to sort through everything. How much time? I don't know. She nodded, even though it felt like her heart was tearing in half. Just remember one thing while you're thinking. What? She had you once and threw you away. I'm here, choosing you every day, even when it's terrifying. She pressed a soft kiss to his jaw. Good night, Max. As she reached the door, his voice stopped her. Sarah? What you said about falling in love with me. She turned back, her heart in her throat. Yes? I'm terrified because I think I might be falling too. Later, alone in her room, Serafina pressed her fingers to her lips, still feeling the warmth of his kiss. Tomorrow, Evangeline would probably make her next move. Tomorrow, Maximilian would have to decide between his past and his future. But tonight, for the first time since this all began, she had hope. The question was whether hope would be enough when the real battle began. The charity gala was supposed to be their first real test as a couple. 3 weeks of practicing their roles, perfecting the subtle touches and shared glances that would convince London's elite that their marriage was real. Instead, it became the battlefield where Evangeline Price declared war. You look stunning, Maximilian murmured as they entered the ballroom, his hand warm against Serafina's back. The emerald silk gown had been another of his choices, but this time he'd asked her opinion first. A small gesture that meant everything. So do you, she replied, meaning it. In his black tuxedo, he looked like every woman's dream of sophistication and power. But she was beginning to see past the armor to the man underneath, the one who liked old movies and helped Mrs. Patterson in the garden when he thought no one was looking. They had managed exactly 3 minutes of comfortable small talk with other guests before Evangeline arrived, making an entrance that would have made Hollywood jealous. The red gown clung to every curve, her blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon, diamonds glittering at her throat like captured stars. "Max, darling," she glided over, ignoring Serafina entirely. "And Serafina, how quaint you look tonight." The insult was delivered with such sugary sweetness that bystanders might have mistaken it for a compliment, but Serafina caught the venom underneath. "Evangeline," Max's voice was carefully neutral. "I didn't know you were attending." "Oh, I'm on the committee now. Lady Margaret insisted when I told her I was back in London permanently." Her smile was razor sharp. "We had such a lovely chat about family traditions, about how important it is to preserve the right bloodlines." Serafina felt Max tense beside her. "What did you say to my grandmother?" "Only that some of us understand duty to family, unlike others who might be temporarily distracted by novelty." Evangeline's green eyes finally acknowledged Serafina. "Tell me, dear, are you enjoying playing dress-up? It must be so exciting, pretending to belong in this world." "I'm not pretending anything," Serafina replied evenly, though her heart was racing. "I belong wherever my husband belongs." "Husband?" Evangeline laughed, the sound like breaking crystal. "How charmingly more permanent that sounds, though we both know how temporary these arrangements can be." Before either could respond, the orchestra struck up a waltz. Evangeline immediately placed her hand on Max's arm. "Our song," she said softly, her mask slipping to reveal genuine emotion. "Remember Vienna, that night when you proposed?" Serafina watched the color drain from Max's face. He had proposed to this woman once, had loved her enough to offer forever, only to be rejected for a better offer. "Dance with me," Evangeline whispered, and it sounded like a plea. "Just once. For what we had." Max looked trapped between past and present, duty and desire. Finally, he turned to Serafina. "Would you mind?" "Of course not," Serafina lied, her smile bright and brittle. "I'll wait here." As she watched them move onto the dance floor, every step perfect, every turn synchronized like they'd never been apart, Serafina felt something crumble inside her chest. They looked like they belonged together, golden, perfect, made for this world of crystal chandeliers and champagne fountains. "Painful, isn't it?" Victoria appeared beside her, champagne flute in hand, satisfaction radiating from every pore. "Watching true love reunite itself," Victoria continued. "They were magnificent together before that unfortunate Italian interlude. Now that she's free again." "He's married to me," Serafina said quietly. "Marriage can be undone, darling, especially when one party entered under false pretenses." Victoria's smile was pure malice. "Did you really think we wouldn't investigate you? Poor little orphan girl, drowning in debt, conveniently rescued by our Max. How very romantic." On the dance floor, Evangeline was saying something that made Max laugh, really laugh the way he'd laughed with Serafina in their private moments. But this was public, visible, a declaration to everyone watching that the prodigal golden couple had returned to each other. "She's going to destroy him again," Serafina whispered, not meaning to speak aloud. "Perhaps," Victoria shrugged. "But she'll do it as his equal, as someone who understands his world, his responsibilities. Not some little charity case playing at being a lady." The waltz ended, but Max and Evangeline remained close, talking intently. Evangeline's hand rested on his chest, right over his heart, and she was gazing up at him with tears in her eyes. Serafina couldn't watch anymore. She slipped away from Victoria, from the ballroom, from the sight of the man she loved being pulled back into his past like iron to a magnet. She found herself in the hotel's garden, breathing hard in the cold night air. The French doors opened behind her, and she hoped desperately it was Max coming to find her. "Running away?" Evangeline's voice cut through the darkness. "How very predictable." Serafina turned to face her. Without the audience of the ballroom, Evangeline's mask had slipped entirely. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by cold calculation. "He's going to leave you," she said matter-of-factly. "Tonight, tomorrow, next week, the timeline doesn't matter. He's going to realize that what we had was real, and what you have is just convenience." "Is that what you told yourself when you left him for the Count? That it wasn't real?" For the first time, Evangeline looked genuinely surprised. "That was different. I was young, stupid. You were greedy." Serafina stepped closer. "You had a man who loved you completely, and you threw it away for a title and money. Now you want him back, because your better offer fell through. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? You're here, aren't you? Playing the heartbroken lover, manipulating his grandmother, using his feelings against him." Serafina's voice grew stronger with each word. "You had your chance, Evangeline. You made your choice. And now I'm making another one." Evangeline's smile returned, cold as winter. "I'm choosing to take back what's mine. Max will remember what real love feels like, and your little arrangement will crumble like the house of cards it is." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Serafina, Lady Margaret wants to see you tomorrow. Something about family expectations and disappointments." Alone in the garden, Serafina wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. Through the French doors, she could see Max searching the ballroom, his face creased with worry. When he spotted her through the glass, relief flooded his features. But as he moved toward her, Evangeline intercepted him, her hand on his arm, her lips moving urgently against his ear. And Serafina knew that whatever battle she thought she was fighting, the real war was just beginning. Lady Margaret's private sitting room felt like a tribunal chamber, as Serafina sat across from the dying matriarch, teacup trembling slightly in her hands. The morning light streaming through tall windows seemed harsh, unforgiving, revealing every crack in the facade she'd built. "Evangeline had quite a lot to say yesterday," Lady Margaret began, her voice deceptively mild. "About contracts, about arrangements, about young women who might be taking advantage of family circumstances." Serafina's heart hammered against her ribs. "Lady Margaret, I can explain." "Can you?" The older woman leaned forward, her pale eyes sharp as winter frost. "Can you explain why my grandson's marriage certificate was filed the same day you signed a financial agreement with his law firm? Can you explain why a supposedly 6-month romance has no photographic evidence, no witnesses, no trace except what's been carefully constructed in the past month?" The teacup rattled against its saucer as Serafina set it down with shaking hands. "You investigated us. I investigate everyone who comes near my family." Lady Margaret's voice carried the weight of 8 decades of protecting the Ashworth legacy. "The question is, what do I do with what I've found?" Silence stretched between them like a chasm. Finally, Serafina lifted her chin with the same defiance that had first attracted Maximilian. "What do you want me to say? That I married your grandson for money? That I'm everything Evangeline claims I am? I want you to tell me the truth." The simple request broke something inside Serafina. The careful walls she'd built came tumbling down, and the truth spilled out like blood from a wound. "Yes, it started as a contract. Yes, I needed the money desperately. My father died owing thousands in medical bills. I was about to be evicted. I had nothing left." Tears she'd been holding back for weeks finally fell. "But it stopped being about money the moment I saw how gentle he was with you. How he laughed when he forgot to be perfect. How he looked at me like I mattered." Lady Margaret listened without interruption as Serafina's composure crumbled completely. "I fell in love with him. Really, truly, stupidly in love. And I know that makes me an idiot because he's Maximilian Ashworth and I'm nobody. But I can't help it. I love how he takes his coffee black and hates mornings but still wakes up early to have breakfast with me. I love that he reads to you when you have bad days, and I love that he pretends not to care about people, but remembers everyone's birthdays. And now?" Lady Margaret's voice was softer now. "Now Evangeline is back, and I'm watching him remember what real love looks like. someone from his world, someone beautiful and accomplished and perfect for him. Serafina wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Someone who isn't a fraud playing dress-up in designer gowns. Lady Margaret was quiet for so long that Serafina wondered if she'd fallen asleep. When she finally spoke, her words were the last thing Serafina expected. Evangeline Price is a calculating, selfish creature who broke my grandson's heart for profit. If you think that's what love looks like, child, then you understand neither love nor my Max. But they have history. They have damage. Lady Margaret's voice turned steel. She taught him that love was conditional, that it could be bought and sold like stocks and bonds. Do you know what you've taught him? Serafina shook her head, afraid to hope. That love can be given freely, that someone can choose him. Not his money, not his name, not his position, but him. The old woman's eyes softened. I've watched him these past weeks. I've seen him smile more in a month with you than he has in 3 years without Evangeline. I've seen him become the man I always hoped he could be. Then why? Because I needed to know if you'd fight for him when the stakes got higher. Lady Margaret smiled, and suddenly looked decades younger. Evangeline was never worthy of him, but you love him enough to let him go if you thought it would make him happy. That's the kind of love worth having. Serafina stared at her in shock. You're not going to expose the contract? My dear girl, do you think I built this family's fortune by being naive? I knew about your arrangement before you walked down the aisle. Lady Margaret chuckled. I was curious to see what would grow from such unusual soil. The answer is something beautiful. But Evangeline says many things. Most of them lies designed to serve her purposes. Lady Margaret's voice hardened. She's been filling Max's head with poison about duty and family expectations, about how you'll never fit in, about how temporary arrangements should stay temporary. Serafina's heart sank. Is it working? He's confused, certainly. Guilt and old wounds make poor counselors. Lady Margaret reached across and patted Serafina's hand. But love has a way of cutting through confusion, doesn't it? Before Serafina could respond, voices in the hallway announced new arrivals. The sitting room doors burst open, and Maximilian strode in with Evangeline close behind, both looking like they'd been arguing. Grandmother, Ava says you wanted to see. Max stopped short when he saw Serafina's tear-stained face. What's wrong? What happened? Nothing that can't be remedied, Lady Margaret said serenely. I was just having a chat with my granddaughter-in-law about family expectations. About how some people don't belong in this family, Evangeline interjected, her voice honey-sweet with poison. About how certain arrangements might be dissolved for everyone's benefit. Max looked between the 3 women, confusion and something like panic flickering across his features. What arrangements? The temporary kind, Evangeline said before anyone else could speak. The kind that were never meant to be permanent. Serafina watched Max's face change, watched understanding, and then something that looked like betrayal cloud his eyes. In that moment, she realized that whatever Lady Margaret's opinion, whatever truths had been revealed, the battle for Max's heart was far from over, and Evangeline was winning. Is that true? Max's voice was barely audible, his blue eyes locked on Serafina's face. Are we temporary? The question hung in the air like a sword about to fall. Serafina looked at the man she loved, at the woman who would destroy him, at the grandmother who had just offered her blessing but might be powerless to prevent the inevitable. Everything that mattered balanced on her next words. Are we temporary? The question echoed in the silence like a death knell. Serafina looked into Maximilian's eyes and saw her own heart breaking reflected there. Confusion, hurt, and something that looked dangerously like goodbye. Max, she began, her voice steady despite the earthquake inside her chest. Yes, it started as temporary. A contract, a business arrangement. Exactly what Evangeline says it was. Evangeline's smile was victorious, sharp enough to cut glass. There. Finally, some honesty. But, Serafina continued, never taking her eyes from Max's face, Somewhere between our fake wedding and learning that you sing off-key in the shower, something changed. Somewhere between pretending to love you and actually falling in love with you, temporary became forever in my heart. Pretty words, Evangeline scoffed. But contracts don't lie. Money doesn't lie. You married him for 50,000 pounds. You're right. Serafina stood, facing the woman who'd haunted Max's dreams. I did marry him for money, just like you would have stayed with him if your count hadn't been a fraud. The difference is I discovered something worth more than security. Which is? Him. The word rang with absolute certainty. Not his money, not his name, not what he can give me. Him. His terrible jokes, his protective streak, the way he pretends not to care but remembers that I like extra cream in my coffee. Max stepped forward, his voice hoarse. Sarah, I love that you read to your grandmother when she's in pain. I love that you're terrified of loving me because it means risking everything again. Tears streamed down her face, but her voice never wavered. And I love you enough to walk away if that's what you need to be happy. How noble. Evangeline's voice dripped sarcasm. The martyr act is very touching, but shut up, Eva. The words came from Max, sharp and final. For the first time since entering the room, he was looking at Evangeline instead of Serafina, and his expression was not kind. What did you say? I said shut up. Max's voice was ice and steel. For 3 years I let you live in my head. Let your betrayal define how I saw love, how I saw myself. But listening to you now, watching you try to destroy something beautiful out of spite and jealousy, I finally see what my grandmother always saw. Max, darling, I don't understand. You're poison, Eva. Beautiful, seductive poison that nearly killed my capacity to love. He turned back to Serafina, and his eyes were blazing with something that made her breath catch. But she saved me from that. She's using you. Evangeline's composure was cracking. The contract proves that she was desperate enough to pretend to love me. What proves that she actually does love me is that she just offered to leave. Max stepped closer to Serafina, his hand reaching for her face. What proves I love her is that I would rather die than let her go. You love me? Serafina whispered. I love you so much it terrifies me. I love your strength, your kindness, your terrible habit of putting too much sugar in everything. His thumb brushed away her tears. I love that you see past the money and the name to the man underneath. I love that you make me want to be worthy of you. Max, please. Evangeline's voice was desperate now. We have history. We have nothing. Max didn't even look at her. We had something once, and you destroyed it. Now I have something real. Something worth fighting for. The contract. Victoria's voice came from the doorway where she'd appeared with Edmund in tow, both clearly expecting to witness Serafina's downfall. Will be honored, Lady Margaret said calmly. Serafina will receive her 50,000 pounds as agreed, plus a rather substantial bonus for services above and beyond the call of duty. Grandmother? Max looked confused. For making my grandson happy, for bringing laughter back to this house, and for loving him well enough to let him choose. Lady Margaret's smile was radiant. Consider it a wedding gift, my dear, a real one this time. Evangeline made a sound like a wounded animal. This is insane. She's nobody. Nothing. She's everything, Max said simply. She's my wife, my partner, my future. And if you can't respect that, you're not welcome in our home. Your home? Edmund spluttered. Boy, you can't just... Actually, he can. Lady Margaret's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. As of this morning, I've transferred full control of the estate to Max. It's his home now, his legacy to protect. And if he chooses to fill it with love instead of tradition, well... She smiled at Serafina. Perhaps it's time for some new traditions. Evangeline stared at them all for a long moment. Her perfect composure finally shattered completely. You'll regret this, Max. When the novelty wears off, when you remember what real class looks like, I'll remember that I chose love over fear. I'll remember that I chose my future over my past. Max's arm wrapped around Serafina's waist, pulling her close. And I'll be grateful every day that I was smart enough to marry the right woman. With a sound of fury, Evangeline stormed from the room, Victoria and Edmund trailing behind her like disappointed vultures. In the sudden quiet, Lady Margaret chuckled. Well, that was rather more entertaining than my usual Tuesday afternoon. Are you serious? Serafina asked, still struggling to process everything. About the money, about all of it. Max turned her to face him fully. But I need to know something first. What? The contract is over, fulfilled. You're free to leave, to take the money and start fresh wherever you want. His voice was steady, but she could see the fear in his eyes. What do you choose? Serafina looked around the room, at the portraits of stern ancestors, at the priceless furniture, at the opulent life that still felt surreal. Then she looked at Max, at the man who'd just chosen her over his past, over expectations, over everything safe and familiar. I choose you, she said simply. Not your money, not your name, not your house. You. Today, tomorrow, for as long as you'll have me. The kiss was different this time, not desperate or stolen or performed for anyone's benefit. It was a promise, a declaration, the first moment of the rest of their lives. When they broke apart, Lady Margaret was dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Now that, she said with satisfaction, is what love looks like. Outside, snow was beginning to fall on the London streets, covering the city in pristine white. But inside the Ashworth mansion, spring had finally arrived. And for the first time in 3 years, Maximilian Ashworth was completely, perfectly, radiantly happy.